how you define the role of cybersecurity in strengthening a country's national defense.
Right. So the predominant move is when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to have a stable foundation for any country to survive. Cybersecurity is not just a function where you install machines, you do a few basics. You need to have a clear policy, one, to identify your data, two, to secure it, and three, to ensure that national safety, especially in critical infrastructure, is safeguarded.
What are the most significant cyber threats that a country faces in terms of its defense systems in the current geopolitical climate?
The thing with cybersecurity, it's not like predominantly the older model. When you see traditional warfare, you would see one nation with stronger military power invade a secondary nation, then they would take it over. So I would say it doesn't drill down to one system alone. It's about the entire policy that's applied to an organization. You might have remote working, you might have people accessing systems, critical systems from home, and just because that system is compromised, we haven't had an update there, an attacker could attack a secondary system, just walk into your entire system and take all of your critical information. So from your military plans, to your company data, to your consumers, confidential information, everything can be secured just by attacking a secondary system. It's more an entire structure where you look at it at a holistic level and then figure out which components are critical to your organization and then secure that as a starting point.
Do you think Sri Lanka is adequately prepared in order to face such a threat? Do we have the necessary resources in place? Where does Sri Lanka stand?
So unfortunately, I would have to say that it's a work in progress for Sri Lanka. The reason being that Sri Lanka in general, I mean, we just came through a 30+ year military conflict. The major issue is that to have a clear policy, you need to have the buy-in of different stakeholders. We have some systems, we have some organizations and defense components where they have invested heavily in systems. So the infrastructure is in place. So I think it's a work in progress, but at the moment, even at a regional level, I would say there's a lot of room to improve in terms of getting this in order.
Cybersecurity is a hot topic that is currently in discussion. We spoke about all this and more with Rosharn Amarasinghe. Stay tuned.
When you have an ambition, trust your instincts, move forward. This is your moment to shape your future, to be independent, to strengthen yourself. Your time is now. Accelerate your progress, empowering your progress for a fulfilled life. Union Assurance.
For 30 years, LMD has been the voice of business in Sri Lanka, capturing the pulse of the nation's corporate landscape through its iconic covers. Each cover tells a story, from the first edition in 1994 to the present day, narrating key moments, leaders and trends that have shaped Sri Lanka's business ecosystem. Over the years, LMD covers have featured thought leaders, business pioneers and game-changing innovations, reflecting the evolution of industries and the economy. As we celebrate 30 years, these covers represent more than just publications. They are a testament to LMD's legacy of excellence in business journalism and its unwavering commitment to being Sri Lanka's leading voice of business. LMD, Sri Lanka's voice of business, a legacy of 30 years.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. Today we are in conversation with the director of eSec Forte Technologies, Lanka, Rosharn Amarasinghe. So thank you for being on the show with us again.
Having me.
In our first question, let's focus on how you define the role of cybersecurity in strengthening a country's national defense.
Right. So the predominant move is when it comes to cybersecurity, you need to have a stable foundation for any country to survive. For an example, you look at economics, you look at banking sector, but without critical infrastructure around cybersecurity, it becomes impossible for the entire nation to function. So cybersecurity is not just a function where you install machines, you do a few basics. You need to have a clear policy, one, to identify your data, two, to secure it, and three, to ensure that national safety, especially in critical infrastructure, is safeguarded.
And in your view, what are the most significant cyber threats that a country faces in terms of its defense systems in the current geopolitical climate?
So it's interesting that you asked that. The thing with cybersecurity, it's not like predominantly the older model. When you see traditional warfare, you would see one nation with stronger military power invade a secondary nation, then they would take it over. But here you could have a 14-year-old boy, a 14-year-old kid sitting at home with the ability to compromise systems just because a defense system or an organization had one tiny flaw, one small flaw in the entire system. So I would say it doesn't drill down to one system alone. It's about the entire policy that's applied to an organization. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have a system in defense, be it a military system. You might have remote working, you might have people accessing systems, critical systems from home. And just because that system is compromised, or haven't had an update there, an attacker could attack a secondary system, just walk into your entire system and take all of your critical information. So from your military plans, to your company data, to your consumers, confidential information, everything can be secured just by attacking a secondary system. So I would say that while we try to identify one or two components, it's more an entire structure where you look at it at a holistic level and then figure out which components are critical to your organization and then secure that as a starting point.
So, talking about this particular area, do you think Sri Lanka is adequately prepared in order to face such a threat? Do we have the necessary resources in place? Where does Sri Lanka stand?
So unfortunately, I would have to say that it's a work in progress for Sri Lanka. The reason being that Sri Lanka in general, I mean, we just came through a 30+ military conflict. And we've had the last 10 years where we looked at several problems from the terrorist attack to economic crisis. So many, I would say so many deterrents over the last few years as well. The major issue is that to have a clear policy, you need to have the buy-in of different stakeholders. You have the military component, you have the non-military, you have politics, you have the government institutions. All of those have to work in collaboration. So while you have isolated silos where there are certain companies doing their part, there are certain organizations that are already investing, we are still going back and forth on it. We have some systems, we have some organizations and defense components where they have invested heavily in systems. So the infrastructure is in place.
Okay.
But the next question is, while you have infrastructure in place, how are the employees, how are the real stakeholders?
Are we really equipped?
Are we equipped? So I think it's a work in progress, but at the moment, even at a regional level, I would say there's a lot of room to improve in terms of getting this in order.
What steps do you think the government should take to establish a robust national defense security system?
So again, it's about policy and compliance. Now, we've seen governments change over a few years. Right now, we have a very stable government in place. And the question that arises is policy continuity. We can't see policies change depending on government to government. It applies the same way in cybersecurity as well. I think the initial steps have been taken. We saw our president, I think, launch there was a news area in the national SOC that was launched last week and a week before last. And that was also add-on to the SL CERT component. SL CERT is the government entity that we would go to, or even an organization or military organization would not go to get that additional support. So I think it's about policy, it's about stability, and it's the fact that you continue these policies regardless of the other changes in the environment. So it's a work in progress there.
So cybersecurity is obviously like a hot topic, right? And in today's climate, there's also discussion about it being included into the syllabuses of schools. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, steps have been taken to include cybersecurity into school curricula.
Correct.
So in that sense, how can educational institutions also support more further knowledge development in this area? Because it's not a niche, but it's also not a widespread thing where people are very much aware of the threats and the pathway towards this. So in that sense, what can educational institutions and research bodies contribute to advancing cybersecurity knowledge and development and enforcement?
Right. So we already see a lot of the organizations, educational organizations, they have introduced cybersecurity into their curriculum, more or less. The problem lies that, now let's just talk of it on a national perspective and connect it to education. We have a lot of talent in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, in most cases, you might end up seeing the parents being the main parties who decide on a lot of educational choices. pushing their children into engineering, becoming a doctor, lawyers, the usual platforms. But when it comes to cybersecurity, there has to be a natural talent as well. Now, you can learn cybersecurity management, you can learn all of those areas, but you also need to have the hacking capabilities, the capabilities of coding, all of those things. And I agree, an education institute, what they can do is they can inculcate the curriculum that they already have, but they should also start fine-tuning it to the practical applications. Now, for an example, as an organization, we would love to have someone, we look at the paper and we go, okay, they have all A's. But in reality, you could have all A's on paper, but if you don't have the practical knowledge to apply it, that's where it gets stuck. So I would recommend one, as you said, education institutes, they have to focus on empowering the future generation to understand what they are studying, and they can also open it out where corporates as well as other companies can absorb them. Now, we see a lot of organizations in Sri Lanka doing that. But unfortunately, you might end up doing something that you're very good in, and you might end up at a desk job where you're not really applying your knowledge that you learn. So educational institutes, I would say, is one of the front runners to sort of support this gap in the national policy, and also research institutes. Now, research institutes, you see it in India, you see it in a lot of other regional superpowers, where they have certain organizations that research purely on cybersecurity initiatives. They find out where the gaps are. They actually exploit certain software that we could be using. It could even be Microsoft or Windows or any other platform that we're using as well. They actively look for bugs and they inform. So that's a separate research body altogether. I think those two areas would definitely help on national policy.
It may tie in somewhat to your next question also, but do you think there's sufficient awareness at leadership and policy levels about the gravity of cyber risks?
So again, interesting question. Let me put it this way: cybersecurity is not in just one division. It's just not. It's just not focused in one area. So when you're talking about divisions, you're talking about the different ministries, the different agencies where you wouldn't really expect cybersecurity to play a role. So my question would be, the subject area heads, are they well versed in cybersecurity? The answer is no, and that is why that awareness is required. I would recommend that a cyber awareness policy be applied across the border, because there are basics, there are foundations that you would require to know. And that could be the Forte to build on knowledge depending on the division. At the moment, we don't see that happening in certain divisions. And that's because it would be non-traditional divisions. You'd expect military to have that knowledge. You'd expect critical services like the finance department or the MOD, other departments such as that to have the knowledge. But you wouldn't expect other lesser known divisions. And the risk is that since all of these are connected together, let's say if an attacker manages to exploit one of those divisions, then they have a superhighway, or they have a highway to get all the information from the other divisions. So it's that segmentation.
It's not a very secure.
It's not secure. I think cybersecurity has to be across the border. It has to be a shared passion and a vision, and that is a work in progress for Sri Lanka in general.
It's time for a break. We'll be back with more.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging media.
Welcome back to the show. We are continuing our discussion with Rosharn Amarasinghe. And what lessons, now you mentioned India earlier, what lessons can Sri Lanka learn from other countries that have successfully countered cyber attacks, especially in terms of national defense?
So it's interesting. I always say this. We always ask about successful cases. But the reality is, if you take the superpowers of the world, now I'm talking about the US, I'm talking about Russia, I'm talking about China, it's Googleable, it's researchable. They have been attacked and they have also been compromised. So the question lies, can we successfully mitigate this, or should we have a policy like a best practice method where we know what to do in case of an emergency or in case of an attack? I remember the US has lost trillions worth of dollars in terms of cyber attacks. That's government as well as non-government. Then we see Russia and the Ukrainian war. We all know about this. It's been going on for years. The cyber attack or the cyber defense policies that they have been critical, because you can't just invade a nation anymore. But you can easily have, as I said, a 15-year-old kid sitting at home with so much knowledge, compromise the system and attack. So I think one lesson that we can learn is the cyber warfare division. We have defense commands and we have all of that appointed in Sri Lanka as well. But most countries have a cyber warfare division, like a war room. they would have a division one to focus on national security. So for an example, if a foreign nation is attacking us, we would have the capability to defend. Also, a lot of countries have an offensive division. That again, it's an interesting topic. People ask about cybersecurity, but I always say that cyber warfare and cyber terrorism. Now, cyber warfare is usually where state actors are involved or governments are involved. Cyber terrorism, as I said, could be the 15-year-old kid, could be some extremist organization that's attacking the country. These lines are now blurred. Across the world, you've seen different leaks, different cases where we realize that governments are now funding private agencies. Private agencies are running government protocol. So my question is, if we don't have a clear policy for cybersecurity in terms of warfare and anti-terrorism, then how would that apply?
You mentioned policy. What recommendations would you make in terms of policies that the government can maybe look at enforcing? What are some critical policies that should be introduced in terms of cybersecurity?
Right. So we've just seen national policy be launched, I think, up to 2029, if I recall correctly. And that was one national policy on cybersecurity. But the issue lies in the way that we approach it. Now, as I told you, the military division is one segment. Then we have the national SOC, which is another segment. I feel that a hybrid model where information is shared and divisions collaborate, that could be one way to move it forward. Capacity building is essential. Unfortunately, given the climate now, I lived abroad for 4 years. And when I came back, I decided I never want to leave the country again. It's not because of the experience, but because we love our country. We don't want to leave. And in the same way, we see a lot of brain drain. So my question is, we talk about education. We talk about competency building. If the inevitable goal is to leave the country after all of this is done, then it's a cycle. We have to keep training new resources. We have to keep sending in. So capacity building is essential. Retention is essential. And in the final one, I always advocate for a cybersecurity doctrine.
Okay.
And what I mean by doctrine is most organizations, they have their own policies saying that if you are attacked, military also has their own policies. But if we have one national policy, a foundation level policy that applies to all institutions, we probably already have a document in place. It's the application of the document and awareness. We see phishing attacks. I'm sure you've gotten the WhatsApp messages saying, please log in OTP, send it across, etc. So see, we have an average working knowledge not to do that. But let's say that there are people in organizations who have seen it all, seen the decades of changes, and they're in their 40s, 50s. They are more prone towards these attacks. Now, if they're in a critical position, they send out something, their phone is compromised, through that their systems are compromised. So I think a cybersecurity doctrine would be an interesting concept to apply. And we always say the traditional war is over, but Sri Lanka has been at war for the last 5 years. If you check, our national sites have been attacked. We have had attacks from, if I recall, the organization was Cyber Elam Force or something on those lines. So we have external entities with vested interests in Sri Lanka attacking us. We have our own local entities sort of going back and forth. So I think that doctrine is important. And the final one is the collaboration between the divisions. Collaboration between military, non-military is important. The collaboration already happens, but we can do it at a higher level. Identify the institutes, identify the military commands, and segment the networks. By segmentation, what I mean is most organizations, your critical data is segmented into one place. But what happens is that it's always connected or interconnected to a different system. If you don't mind me touching on the example of Stuxnet. Now, Stuxnet was the Iran had the enrichment program for the nuclear focus. They were looking at going nuclear one time. And there was this virus called Stuxnet. And now this the enrichment program was an isolated environment. There was no internet connection. There was nothing there. They had the popular theory is that either one of the systems that was brought in was compromised, or maybe an external pen drive or another device was compromised. But what it did was they had this the centrifuges. The centrifuges spin at a certain speed, and that helps them enrich the plutonium, the nuclear material.
Okay.
They started attacking this system so that they spun uncontrollably and they got destroyed. So you saw the entire Iranian program go back by months and years just because this system attacked. What happened after that was this virus got loose. And then it started attacking systems across the world. So a lot of times what you realize is it could be something small. It could be just a code that was created and that rolls into a major virus.
It can have a huge impact.
Yes. So at the last I mentioned this defense conference recently, I termed it as weapons of mass destabilization rather than mass destruction. Okay. And there were some counter arguments on it. But the reality is if you can sit in your own home, you can compromise the entire critical network. If you bring down stock exchanges, if you bring down systems, is that not a weapon of mass destruction?
Yeah.
And that could also lead the door to invade, let's say, neighboring countries. They destabilize your technical networks. You can actually do an invasion post. And that's what we're seeing in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict as well.
We've been in conversation with the director of eSec Forte Technologies, Lanka, Rosharn Amarasinghe. Thank you for taking the time and for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to all our viewers for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thank you for watching and stay safe.